Imagine standing on a cliff edge, staring out at the vastest stretch of ocean on planet Earth. Behind you stand giants. Hundreds of them. They are carved from volcanic stone, weighing up to 80 tons. Their hollow eyes gazing eternally inward across a barren landscape. These are the Moai of Easter Island. They are the silent sentinels of a mystery that has haunted the modern world for 3 centuries. We look at them and we see an engineering marvel, but we also feel a chill, because these statues were not built by aliens, nor by a lost continent. They were built by a thriving, complex human society that somehow disastrously failed. How did a people capable of such brilliance end up on the brink of extinction? Did they destroy their own paradise? Or were they victims of a tragedy beyond their control? The stone giants remain, but the people vanished. Over the next 20 minutes, we will peel back the layers of history to uncover the rise, the fall, and the enduring warning of Rapa Nui. To understand the end, we must first understand the miraculous beginning. The story of Easter Island does not begin with stone, but with water, endless, treacherous water. Roughly 1,000 years ago, a group of daring navigators set out from the islands of Polynesia in double-hull canoes. They were sailing into the unknown, guided only by the stars, the currents, and the flight patterns of birds. It is hard for us today, with our satellites and maps, to grasp the sheer audacity of this voyage. They were heading into the most isolated corner of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from the nearest continent. Against all odds, they found a speck of land. It was a lush, subtropical paradise covering just 63 square miles, teeming with giant palm trees and seabirds. They called it Te Pito o Te Henua, the navel of the world. Legend tells us they were led by a king named Hotu Matue. When they stepped onto the white sand of Anakina Beach, they brought with them chickens, rats, and crops like sweet potato and taro. They also brought a rich culture, a rigid social hierarchy, and profound spiritual connection to their ancestors. For centuries, isolation was their greatest strength. With no enemies to fight and abundant resources, the population exploded. They built villages. They farmed the fertile volcanic soil, and they began to dream of something greater than mere survival. They began to dream in stone. This brings us to the most defining obsession of the Rapa Nui people, the Moai. Why did they build them? The answer lies in the concept of mana, a supernatural power and authority. The islanders believed that their chiefs and high-ranking ancestors possessed this power, and that by carving their likeness in stone, they could capture the energy to protect the community. The statues were not just art. They were antennas for spiritual power, projecting safety and prosperity over the villages they watched. And so, the great work began. The heart of this industry was the volcanic crater of Reno Raraku. If you visit the island today, this quarry feels like a workshop that was abandoned only yesterday. Unfinished statues still line the rock, some half-carved, as if the workers simply dropped their tools and walked away. It was here that the master carvers, using harder stone chisels called toki, chipped away at the compressed volcanic ash. This was not a task for the impatient. Carving a single moai could take a team of men a year or more to complete. They worked from the front, detailing the long noses, the heavy brows, and the pursed lips before finally detaching the back from the bedrock. But carving was only half the battle. The true genius of Rapa Nui engineering, and the source of endless debate, was how they moved them. How do you move a multi-ton monolith miles across rugged terrain without wheels, without draft animals, and without cranes? For decades, historians argued over theories of rolling logs and sledges, viewing the islanders as brute force laborers. But recent experiments and oral traditions suggest something more elegant. The Rapa Nui people say the statues walked. By using ropes and a rhythmic, rocking motion, teams of people could maneuver the standing statues forward, waddling them side to side. It was a feat of cooperation and choreography, a massive community effort that united the clans. As the centuries passed, the ambition grew. The statues became larger, and the platforms, or ahu, became more elaborate. Some moai were even crowned with pakeo, massive cylinders of red scoria stone representing hair or headdresses balanced precariously on top of the heads. This was the golden age of Rapa Nui. The island was a hive of activity, a testament to human ingenuity. The palm forest provided the rope, the sledges, and the fuel. The ocean provided fish, particularly porpoise and tuna, which the islanders caught from their seaworthy canoes. There was food, there was order, and there was the eternal gaze of the ancestors watching over a civilization that seemed destined to last forever. However, a shadow was slowly creeping over the navel of the world. The very success of their society was beginning to sow the seeds of a complex crisis. It was not a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, invisible erosion of the foundation they stood upon. As the population peaked, the pressure on the small island's ecosystem intensified. The competition between clans to build bigger and better statues accelerated. To move more statues, they needed more rope and more wood. To feed more people, they needed more land for agriculture. The lush palm forest, which had greeted the first voyagers, began to thin. Pollen analysis in the crater lakes reveals a dramatic story hidden in the mud. Over a period of a few centuries, the millions of giant palm trees that once blanketed the island vanished. The deforestation was almost total, but was it just reckless harvesting by humans? The story is more complicated. The Polynesian rat, brought along on the first canoes as a food source, found a paradise of its own with no natural predators. The rat population exploded, devouring the seeds of the palm trees and preventing the forest from regenerating. It was a dual attack. Humans cutting down the mature trees for construction fuel, and rats destroying the next generation before it could even sprout. As the trees disappeared, the consequences cascaded through society with terrifying speed. Without the strong palm trunks, the islanders could no longer build the sturdy, ocean-going canoes needed to hunt porpoise in the deep sea. They were trapped on the island, cut off from their most significant source of protein. Soil erosion followed, washing the fertile topsoil into the sea and damaging the crop yields. The manna of the ancestors seemed to be failing. The statues, which demanded so much resource and labor to create, stood silent as the forest died around them. The golden age was ending and a darker, more desperate era was about to begin. The question now changed from how big can we build to how will we survive? As the forest vanished, the silence of the island grew heavier. The shade was gone. The wind whipped across the unprotected fields, drying out the soil. The streams began to fade. The islanders, once blessed with abundance, now faced a terrifying reality. The land was no longer providing enough to sustain them. The social contract that held the Rapa Nui society together began to fracture. For centuries, the people had obeyed the chiefs and priests in exchange for the manna that brought rain and harvest. But now, the crops were failing. The hunger was growing. The ancestors, staring blindly from their stone platforms, seemed to have abandoned their children. Archaeological evidence from this period paints a picture of a society under immense stress. In the layers of soil corresponding to this era, researchers find a proliferation of Moai, sharp tools made of obsidian, the dark volcanic glass found on the island. For a long time, these were interpreted solely as spear points, evidence of a brutal civil war that decimated the population. While modern analysis suggests they may have been general-purpose tools, their sheer number indicates a shift. Life had become harder. Survival had become a struggle. The trust between the clans evaporated, replaced by suspicion and the desperate defense of dwindling resources. And then the unthinkable happened. The statues began to fall. They did not fall by the hands of nature. No earthquake or storm toppled them. They were pushed across the island. The great Moai were deliberately overthrown from their ahus. In a systematic rejection of the old order, rival clans would raid each other's territories and topple the guardians of their enemies. Most were pushed face down, a symbolic act to blind the statue, to break its neck, and to sever the flow of mana protecting the village. The eyes, often made of white coral with pupils of obsidian, were shattered or removed. The message was clear: the old gods had failed. The era of the giants was over. Yet, The resilience of the Rapa Nui people is the true marvel of this story. They did not simply vanish into chaos. Amidst the ecological collapse and social upheaval, they reinvented themselves. They created a new solution to manage their scarcity, a system that replaced hereditary rule with a meritocracy born of blood and bravery. This was the rise of the Tangata Manu, the Birdman cult. The center of power shifted from the coastal villages to the high, windswept cliffs of Orongo, perched on the rim of the Reno Cal volcano. Here, stone houses were built into the hillside, overlooking the dark ocean, and 3 small islets in the distance. Each year, the clans would gather for a dangerous competition to select the new leader of the island. The challenge was simple but deadly. Each clan selected a champion, a hopu. At the signal, these men would scramble down the sheer 1,000-foot cliffs to the crashing surf below. Using reed floats, they had to swim over a mile through shark-infested waters to the islet of Motu Nui. There they would wait, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. They were waiting for the arrival of the sooty tern, a migratory seabird. The goal was to find the first egg of the season, secure it in a headband, swim back to the treacherous currents, climb the vertical cliffs, and present the unbroken egg to their patron. The winner became the Birdman, the sacred representative of the creator god Make. For 1 year, his clan would hold the exclusive rights to gather eggs and resources. It was a brutal but brilliant political system, a way to ration the island's limited food and prevent total war through ritualized competition. Under the Birdman system, the population stabilized. They adapted to their treeless landscape by practicing lithic mulch agriculture, planting crops in rock gardens to protect the soil from wind and evaporation. They survived. They endured. But while they had weathered the storm from within, they were wholly unprepared for the storm that was gathering on the horizon. On Easter Sunday, April 5th, 1722, 3 Dutch ships commanded by Jacob Roggeveen spotted the island. To the Europeans, it was a new discovery. To the islanders, it was likely the first contact with the outside world in 1,000 years. Roggeveen named the land Easter Island and described the people with tattoos and elongated earlobes, who were curious and bold. However, this first encounter ended in bloodshed. A misunderstanding led to the Dutch firing their muskets, killing a dozen islanders. It was a grim foreshadowing of what was to come. For the next century, visits were sporadic. Captain Cook arrived in 1774 and noted a melancholic scene. The people seemed poor, small in number, and many of the great statues were already toppled. The island was a shadow of its former glory, but the culture was still intact. The people were still Rapa Nui. The true apocalypse, the event that nearly erased them from history, did not come from cutting down trees. It came from the greed of other men. The year 1862 marks the darkest chapter in Easter Island's history. Slave raiders from Peru arrived in a fleet of ships. They didn't come to trade. They came to steal human lives. In a series of violent raids, they captured and enslaved roughly 1,500 islanders, about half of the remaining population. But they didn't just take the young and strong. They took the king, the royal family, and the Maori, the learned men who knew how to read the Rongorongo script, the island's mysterious written language. They were hauled away to work in the guano mines and plantations of Peru. The international outcry eventually forced the repatriation of the islanders, but the damage was catastrophic. Only about a dozen survived the brutal conditions to return home, but they brought with them a silent killer, smallpox. The disease tore through the remaining population like wildfire. By 1877, the once great civilization of Rapa Nui, which had built the largest statues in the Pacific and navigated the open ocean, had been reduced to just 111 souls. 111 people. That was all that stood between their culture and total extinction. The knowledge of the script was lost. The oral traditions were fragmented. The connection to the past hung by a thread. In the aftermath, the island was annexed by Chile in 1888, but life did not improve. The entire island was leased to a sheep farming company. The remaining Rapa Nui people were forced to live in a small, walled-off section of Hongaroa, restricted from roaming their own ancestral lands, while 60,000 sheep grazed over fallen statues. For nearly a century, they were prisoners in their own home, cut off from the very monuments that defined them. From the depths of near extinction, a pulse of life began to beat again. The turning point for the modern Rapa Nui did not come from politics initially, but from science and memory. In the mid-20th century, the world finally turned its eyes back to the island, not to exploit it, but to understand it. Thor Heyerdahl and later, the anthropologist William Malloy, arrived to study the history that had been buried under the grass and sheep pastures. For the Rapa Nui people, this was a spark. Working alongside these researchers, they began to piece together the fragmented stories of their ancestors. They weren't just digging up stones. They were excavating their own identity. The physical resurrection of the island began in earnest in the 1990s at Ahu Tongariki. This was the largest ceremonial platform on the island, home to 15 massive Moai. But history had been cruel to Tongariki. Not only had the statues been toppled during the clan wars, but in 1960, a massive tsunami triggered by an earthquake in Chile had swept over the site, scattering the multi-ton giants inland like pebbles. It looked like a graveyard of jagged rock. In a monumental effort involving the Chilean government, archaeologists, and a Japanese crane company, the 15 giants were lifted back onto their pedestals. When the final Moai was set in place, staring once again toward the village, it was a powerful symbol. The giants had returned, and so had the people. Today, the Rapa Nui are no longer prisoners in their own land. After gaining Chilean citizenship in 1966 and fighting for decades to reclaim their ancestral territories, the islanders are now taking charge of their future. The fences are down. The language is being taught in schools again. The Tupti Rapa Nui Festival, held every February, is not a show for tourists, but a vibrant celebration of strength, dance, and music for the community itself. They carve wood and stone today not to harness supernatural manna, but to preserve a heritage that refuses to die. They are the living descendants of the navigators, the builders, and the survivors. So, what is the true legacy of Easter Island? For years, the story of Rapa Nui was taught as a cautionary tale of ecocide, a simple parable of stupid people who cut down the last tree and doomed themselves. But that view is too simple and perhaps too harsh. When we look closer, we don't see a failure. We see an incredible capacity for adaptation. When the trees were gone, they invented rock gardening. When the food ran low, they invented the Birdman cult to manage violence. When their population crashed to 111, they rebuilt a nation. They faced challenges that would have broken most societies, and they are still standing. However, the warning remains valid, and it is louder today than ever before. Easter Island is a microcosm of our planet. Like the Rapa Nui, we are floating in a vast, dark ocean of space. We have limited resources. We have a growing population, and we have nowhere else to go. The people of Rapa Nui had no other island to sail to when the forest fell. We have no other Earth to escape to if our atmosphere fails. The stone giants of Rapa Nui are not just ancient curiosities. They are a mirror. They reflect our potential for greatness, our capacity for destruction, and ultimately, our responsibility to the ground we stand on. The Moai continue to watch. They have seen the rise of kings, the fall of forests, the arrival of ships, and the flash of cameras. They have survived the collapse of their civilization to become icons of the world. Perhaps their silence is not empty, but patient. They are waiting to see if we will learn the lesson that their creators paid such a high price to leave behind. The story of Easter Island is not just about the past. It is a question about our future. Will we be the builders who destroy our home, or the survivors who find a way to endure? Thank you for joining us on this journey to the navel of the world. The history of Rapa Nui is filled with theories and mysteries that are still being debated by archaeologists today. We want to hear your thoughts. If you could stand in front of the Great Moai at Reino Raraku and ask the ancient builders just one question about their construction techniques or their vision for the future, What would it be? Leave your question in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about human ingenuity. If you found this history as fascinating as we did, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the rise and fall of ancient civilizations. Until next time, keep looking for the stories hidden in the stone